His Catholic father, Hans Schindler, a German bohemian, owned a farm machinery business in the Czech Republic in the early 1900s. As a child, his neighbor was a Jewish rabbi whose two sons were his closest childhood friends. As a youth, he was kicked out of high school after he forged the signature of his parents on his report card. He later pursued several trades, including machinery, and worked for his father as a young adult. He served 18 months in the Czech Army, where he achieved the rank of Lance Corporal in the 10th Infantry Regiment of the 31st Army. After the Army, his employment life took a series of downturns, until at 23 years old, he landed a job with the Bank of Prague from 1931 to 1938. During his mid-20s, he was arrested several times for public drunkenness. He also joined the Sudeten German Party, a separatist party which quickly aligned with the rising Nazi Party in Germany. Although he was a citizen of Czechoslovakia and a military veteran, he became a spy for Abwehr, the military intelligence agency of Nazi Germany, for whom he collected intel to help with the planning of a German invasion of Czechoslovakia. In short, he was a traitor to his own nation. He continued with the intelligence agency through the beginning months of World War II, including assisting in the planning for Hitler's invasion of Poland. He left espionage work behind in 1940 when he acquired a bankrupt Jewish business in Krakow, Poland. All property belonging to Polish Jews, including their possessions, places of business, and homes, were seized by the Germans beginning immediately after the invasion, and Jewish citizens were stripped of their civil rights. In Krakow, he met Itzhak Stern, an accountant who helped him purchase an enamelware company that produced cookware for the Nazi troops. Initially, he was mostly interested in the money-making potential of the business and hired Jews because they were cheaper to employ than Poles. The wages, you see, were set by the occupying Nazi regime. Enlargements to the facility in the 4 years that Schindler was in charge included the addition of an outpatient clinic, co-op, kitchen, and dining room for the workers, in addition to expansion of the factory and its related office space. Stern would later help him grow the number of Jewish workers, wives, children, and people with disabilities that he employed in an effort to keep them from being taken to the Nazi death camps. He acquired more businesses that produced shells for the German army, many of which were defective. Bribes and black market deals kept the Nazis from taking his workers, and in one case even helped him retrieve 300 women sent to Auschwitz by mistake. No one had ever brought somebody back from Auschwitz. No one knows for certain why Oskar Schindler did what he did, or just what transformed the greedy fascist industrialist into a savior and hero for so many people. Some have speculated that those two young friends from his childhood had something to do with his desire to save every Jewish person he could from the Nazi death camps. One surviving Krakow Jewish worker said Oskar Schindler was a sentimentalist who loved the simplicity of doing good, a man full of flaws like the rest of us, an ordinary man who, even in the worst of circumstances, did extraordinary things matched by no one. The unlikeliest of all role models, who started by earning millions as a war profiteer and ended by spending his last pfennig and risking his life to save his 1,300 Schindler Jews. We've been journeying through the gospel according to Luke during these past several months, and as we experience the difference of discipleship this fall. Last week we recall the parables or teaching stories Jesus told of the shepherd who leaves behind 99 sheep to search for the one lost sheep. A woman who with a lost coin who sweeps the whole house in the middle of the night to find that one lost coin. And tucked in between those stories and today's story of the dishonest manager or shrewd steward or manager is the famous parable of the prodigal son, who returns to his father after squandering his inheritance and is celebrated by his father rather than scorned, who was lost but now is found. We asked last week, what if God is truly like that? Not as some deterministic ruler, but a determined parent who will not let us go. Not even the ones we label as most insignificant and unworthy among us, even sometimes ourselves. What if God is truly like that? We proclaimed that God's good news for us is that God will never cease to search for every one of us when we wander from the boundless love that God has for us and demands that we have for one another. The good news we proclaimed is that whether you have experienced the difference of discipleship in your life or not, whether you believe that you have been found or remain lost, God desires for your reconciliation unto God's own self. God longs for a truly intimate and open and trusting relationship with you and with all of humanity. We celebrated God's passion to find all who are lost along the way, even you and even me. And that is far greater than our drive to be on the top of the heap of humanity. Larger than our fears of losing our share of God's love and grace as if there is not enough to go around. More enduring than our strongest efforts to turn and run away. And so it's in that context that we arrive at what some scholars and commentators call the most confusing parable of Jesus. A story about a dishonest or shrewd manager. Some suggest that Jesus has a dual audience of tax collectors and sinners on the one hand, and his disciples on the other. So perhaps what makes it so hard to read is perhaps Jesus is saying this to this crowd and turning and saying this to this crowd in the story. Jesus was addressing them both as the story unfolds. What he says over here would not be understood over here, and what he says over here would not be understood over here. But each crowd is getting the same message. First century Jews would have heard the story as all stories about stewards and property owners were heard, with the steward or manager being the people of Israel and the owner being God. It's a good rabbinic story. And of course, Israel has mismanaged and squandered God's property. Mismanaged and squandered God's property. Does that sound a little like the prodigal son, who may have squandered away his father's wealth and his inheritance, potentially destroying his relationship with his father, not to mention his older brother? But Jesus, as Jesus often does, turns this story on its head. When after the dishonest steward reduces the debts of his debtors in order that they may choose to deal with him well in his approaching unemployment, the master commends him and praises him for his shrewdness. Nobody was expecting that. But nobody expected a father whose son had squandered his inheritance to call for his finest robe to welcome him home either. More abundant mercy. More grace just thrown around as if it's free and as if there is truly enough for this guy. Julian Dishonest at the University Church in Chicago said he's not telling his disciples here to be dishonest. This is a sermon, he said, for the already dishonest among them. For the already dishonest among them. The steward, he says, is not praised because he becomes dishonest. He is praised because he finally figures out how to do some good for his boss. He's given a second chance to do something right, even with dishonest wealth. Oskar Schindler's story may illustrate that very point in this parable. He took dishonest wealth acquired through the exploitation of Jewish workers, made friends of the Jews of Krakow, used his wealth to bribe Nazi officials and to stop 1,300 of his friends from being killed. And then in turn was cared for by his friends when he had spent his last penny, and even honored in death to be buried in Jerusalem, a righteous man on Mount Zion, the place where God pitched his tent among humanity. The only member of the Nazi party to be honored in this way. Truth be told, we are all dishonest stewards. We all have dishonest wealth because our global economy makes it nearly impossible for us to not benefit from the exploitation of someone else or some part of God's good creation somewhere. Here at Central, we support equal exchange for this very reason. To do some good with whatever wealth we have, honest or dishonest. To participate in a coffee and chocolate trade that is responsible and fair for the land and the farmers who work that land. And while we could have a conversation on how our investments empower women and children or exploit them, like our pension funds and our 401ks and all of those things, how our buying power oppresses black and brown people here and across the globe who toil for below poverty wages, harvesting our food, cleaning our resorts, and mining minerals to power our smartphones. We could have a conversation how our wasteful habits of using single-use plastics pollutes God's oceans and other essential habitats. We could have this conversation about the essential goodness or evil of money, wealth, and economic privilege. All worthy conversations and meaningful for our life of discipleship with complex yet simple answers. Does what we invest in, purchase, or consume love our neighbor? Certainly, that's a theme in Luke's gospel. But this story in this place in Luke's gospel, however, is more about God's ultimate desire to bring wholeness into a fragmented world torn apart, no doubt, by greed and dishonesty. This story is about God's desire to reconcile relationships, even those relationships that may have originated dishonestly. This story is about God's desire to mend the brokenness of our relationship with God and with one another at all cost. This, then, is the difference of discipleship. That there's no other relationship will demonstrate the truly abundant mercy and powerful love of God found in Jesus. Such love and mercy to seek and to find the lost. Such love and mercy to give vision to the misguided and forgiveness to those who choose to run the other way. Such love and mercy to welcome home the sinner and to transform hearts and lives, yours and mine, even here, even now.